it's very unclear what you can and can't do, first just on the area of detection, because depending on how you're detecting and what equipment you're using, you may be in violation of one of 22 rules or regulations that don't allow you to do that. So the one thing that this strategy will do is it will expand the capabilities for law enforcement to be able to do a more in-depth detection process and really define what is okay and what's not.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 380. What is the Domestic Counter UAS National Action Plan? And how can public safety organizations prepare for it? For that question, we turn to Charles Werner, Director of DroneResponders, a nonprofit organization created to unite aerial first responders, emergency managers, and search and rescue specialists in maximizing drone operations for public safety. The organization is approaching 7,000 members worldwide, most of whom are using drones in a variety of public safety applications. DroneResponders has become the leading resource for public safety use of drone technology. Charles is the retired Charlottesville fire chief and 46-year public safety veteran. After retirement, Charles worked with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management for 2 years as Senior Advisor Acting Deputy State Coordinator. He served in numerous leadership roles at the local, state, and national levels on public safety initiatives. He is an FAA certificate remote pilot, an author with more than 150 internationally published articles, and serves as a contributor to numerous other public safety publications. Charles has received numerous commendations, 3 Virginia Governor's Awards of Excellence, recognized as the National Career Fire Chief Award in 2008, and Homeland Security Today's Person of the Year in 2018. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Charles talks about a new White House initiative on counter-UAS. This initiative will impact all public safety organizations in the United States, and he offers suggestions on how to work with and prepare for the National Action Plan. He also provides an update on what DroneResponders is doing to promote public safety use of drones. But before we hear from Charles, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign. For a donation in any amount, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. To donate, go to DroneRadioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@DroneRadioshow.com. So let's learn about the Domestic Counter UAS National Action Plan with Charles Werner of DroneResponders. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Charles to introduce himself.
I'm Charles Werner. I'm the Director of DroneResponders and working on all things UAS. That includes enabling for good, countering for bad, and trying to stay involved with the air traffic management piece as we move forward.
Charles, I'm sure most people have heard of DroneResponders, but give us a quick overview of the organization and its mission.
DroneResponders was organized in 2019 for the specific purpose of helping to advance public safety uncrewed aircraft systems more quickly in the public safety sector. We've also found that we've extended into the public service sector as well. Basically, anybody who's operating public safety and or public aircraft operations. And what we've done is we created a resource center first to make information available that when people first started, people didn't have these resources, SOPs, best practices, lessons learned. And then we created the dashboard. We did that with Esri and NASA Ames to have departments and agencies put their programs on the map globally to share what they're doing. And right now we have over 1,200 agencies that are sharing their information as to the number of pilots, missions they fly, aircraft they're flying, payloads, capabilities, and all those things. So it gives people a place to look to see, one, who's around them. And some people are using it to organize and facilitate training. And then we now have over 6,500 members, and we have participation from 83 countries and over 400 international members.
I'd like to start by getting some insights into a new White House initiative on counter-UAS. In April, the Biden administration released the Domestic Counter Unmanned Aircraft Systems National Action Plan, designed to expand on how we can protect against nefarious UAS activity. Also included is who is authorized to take action and how it can be accomplished lawfully. DroneResponders has been tracking the plan. What can you tell us about it?
So the national strategy is a starting point of developing kind of a vision forward of how we can start addressing the problems that we're finding with drones. And right now, it's very unclear what you can and can't do, first, just on the area of detection, because depending on how you're detecting and what equipment you're using, you may be in violation of one of 22 rules or regulations that don't allow you to do that. So the one thing that this strategy will do is it will expand the capabilities for law enforcement to be able to do a more in-depth detection process and really define what is okay and what's not. The second piece of that, it sets a pilot project in place that allows for 12 pilot projects per year for 6 years for the purpose of developing the policies, the procedures, the training, and that's working with local state agencies and law enforcement. And again, it's to learn how do we do the next piece of it, the mitigation, and actually take down the aircraft. Because right now the law says you can't take down the aircraft. And the only authorities that are given for any kind of true counter-UAS mitigation are the federal agencies. I think DOJ, DOD, DOE, and DHS, and there might be one other.
What's the status of the strategy?
So the national strategy basically is in the conceptual stage, but what's happened from that, it's my understanding, and I don't remember the number offhand, but the legislation has gone forward drafted that took the basic principles that we talked about just now and some more and more specifics to move that forward. It was originally thought it was going to be part of the emerging technologies bill that was sunsetting. They've since extended that, so it won't be rushed into it, but we're hoping sometime in the first quarter that the legislation will include and hopefully pass to move forward. Because as you've probably read, we have major problems that are occurring with contraband into prisons. And what happens with that, it does two things. One, it may be something that helps them to escape. It may be something that's just dropped in a way of some kind of merchandise like cigarettes or booze or radios or telephones. And that causes a huge ruckus in that courtyard by itself. So you have the unrest that comes from that. Then we've had the numerous flights over athletic stadiums. Fortunately, there hasn't been anything that's been nefarious. It's been more likely to be people going a little bit further than they knew they could. And then we've got the issue of drones being used to carry contraband across the border, as well as potential weapons. And in some instances, they've seen explosives.
I read in the legislation that it calls for a rulemaking committee, or another ARC, as they're commonly referred to. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I think I've heard from a number of sources that they were hoping that the notifications for participation on a counter-UAS aviation rulemaking committee sometime this month or in November. But if that doesn't happen, it may spin over into January as we're starting to get into the holidays. But it is planned to go forward. And the scope of that is really to look at what are the issues surrounding a counter-UAS as it relates to the national airspace.
So how do you hope drone responders will fit into the development of the strategy?
Well, one, I'm fairly certain that we'll be participating on the Aviation Rulemaking Committee, although I haven't received, confirmation. I have submitted my name to participate. We were chosen to serve on the BVLOS ARC, which was long and arduous. But I think the way we fit into this whole scheme of things is basically to be an information provider, is to create the working group to be able, one, to share the information that comes out to people that are interested, but also to get the questions that are coming back from them so that we can share that information with the FAA and or any other agencies that are working on this.
What type of questions do you get from the drone responders community? What are they most concerned with in regard to counter-UAS?
So people are asking what is going to be allowed in the way of detection and mitigation. They're asking what training is going to be involved, because they're specifically interested if they are interested in being one of the pilot projects. As far as I know, there isn't any mechanism yet as to applications, although I do know that some people have their congressman or senator to send recommendations in to whomever is going to be deciding. I think who's going to pay for the training and who's going to pay for the equipment. So that's the big questions. And a lot of people are concerned that there may be a mandate. And if there's a mandate, then there's no funding, then it becomes an unfunded mandate.
One of the things that I've consistently heard through the years is the need for more enforcement. Because if there's no enforcement, people will continue to do things they're not supposed to do.
You know, what we've seen through some of the Assure studies that have been ongoing, some presentations that we've seen, is that there's a huge amount of people that are flying well beyond Part 107 restrictions, higher than 400 feet without any type of waiver, flying over people. So there needs to be, one, a strong education awareness, but then an enforcement. And the question is, how does that get done? Because obviously the FAA can't be everywhere. Does that then pass down through these localities, like in the pilot projects, or do they become federally sworn so that they can then actually enforce the federal regulations? Those questions haven't been answered yet.
And that goes back to what you said earlier about what first responders can actually do and not do.
Yeah, some of the big concerns are we don't want to be chasing drones around as law enforcement officers. And when we've had conversations, we've reached out to the federal government. We said, if you have a credible threat at one of our stadiums, what are we doing? And of course, the answer is we'll send somebody if they're available. But if you had multiple credible threats at stadiums and you didn't have a general location, you could have them be trying to figure out how do you cover all the stadiums. You've got NCAA, you've got NFL, you've got Major League Baseball, you've got NASCAR. So you've got a lot of events that are occurring around the country.
Is there a timeline for the rulemaking process and the pilot projects?
The only thing that I've heard is that originally they were hoping that it was going to be signed by the Secretary of Transportation in October, and that in the middle of November, that participation notifications would go out. Then what I've heard is, well, until it's off of his desk, nothing else moves forward. So it really is all based on that action.
Knowing that the White House has released its plan, what should public safety organizations be doing now to adequately ensure that a sound, workable strategy is developed?
Well, first, we have to get the legislation passed. So I'd say the first thing is to public safety, public service, private sector, all the people out there that are involved with drones realize that we've got to have this capability to keep the balance scale from really bad things happening. We've seen the commercial drones are being used over in the theater of war, especially in Ukraine. We're seeing that back and forth between Russia and Ukraine. And we're seeing that come into the United States in the prisons and some other places. So we've got to really reinforce that and try to keep the momentum on the legislation. So I would say one of the first things to do is to communicate with your member of Congress to say, please get this legislation through.
DroneResponders is also starting an internal working group on counter UAS. How did that come about, and what will it do?
First, I really hadn't planned to do anything. I was going to let the ARC go forward and participate in that. But what happened is I was getting a lot of questions from people saying, what have you heard about the counter UAS? What are you hearing about the legislation? And so depending on how you're involved, you may or may not get a briefing from the White House, because I'm in a number of different groups. So I'll hear things from the White House and some things from Congress, but everybody else isn't. So when I started sharing a little bit about what I was hearing, I started getting requests of saying, hey, is there a way that we can, set something up to get regular updates? And so that's why we created the DroneResponders Public Safety Alliance Counter UAS Working Group. And I guess I was surprised, but the responses were very quick. And we now have over 100 people who have signed up to be on the working group. Now, understand, it's a large group. This is not designed specifically to be an action-oriented group. It's more designed to be an information flow out and back from the people in public safety.
It's a great idea, and it shows the high level of interest by your members in this issue.
It's probably been one of the largest interest areas that I've seen. I think the two big things right now, if I were saying UAS from public safety, are drone as a first responder and counter UAS.
Will the information that you're compiling for the working group be available to the general public as well?
Yes, we will have a counter UAS working group folder that will be in the resource center, and you have to be a member of DroneResponders to get into the resource center, but it's free. There's no charge, and that's just so that we get people registered so we can actually communicate with people once they've become a member. But yes, all that information will be available, and it's basically trying to get all the information we can in a central place that people can then go through. If they want to see the legislation, they can see the legislation. If they want to see the national strategy, they can see that as well.
Anything else on the counter UAS working group or the legislation that we didn't cover?
I just think it's going to be an interesting walk down a path on this because we've got probably an equal amount of members of Congress that are for moving forward as well as being very cautious in the movement forward.
What are some of the reasons for the caution?
They want to make sure there's a very well-defined policy of when and where that you actually do counter UAS from a mitigation perspective. They're not so much worried about the detection of the drones because we're going to have remote ID anyway, and some of that's going to come out and we'll be able to see things. They're more concerned about that actual mitigation because they're concerned, as you may know, there are different ways that you can do mitigation. You can do RF interference. You can do manipulation of the controls through the radio frequency as well. You can take it down by another drone that has a net. You can take it down by jamming. And their concern is that we make sure that this is done in such a way that it doesn't create other harmful issues.
In addition to the counter UAS initiative, what other activities is DroneResponders pursuing?
Well, we're involved in quite a few things. Really involved with Drone as a First Responder. We now have partnered with UAS Norway, where we're going to be co-sponsoring a Drone as a First Responder conference in Norway, November 21st through the 23rd. And that's to take this forward. And there, I'll give you a sneak preview. We're going to announce that we're going to create the Drone as a First Responder International Initiative to really start sharing this information out. Because what we found so far, we created a Drone as a First Responder working group, similar kind of idea, but it's been sharing all the information back and forth. We have 7 folders, which go through everything from policy, safety case, privacy, all the issues that are there. So if you're going to file for a COA to be able to do Drone as a First Responder, you'll have the information of how to build your COA case when you put your application in. Then we're also working with MITRE on a project now on training to create the first standard for public safety UAS remote pilot curriculum. So we'll have both an indoor and an outdoor curriculum that we hope to put in place that will be available for people to use around the country. And again, it'll be the first standard that it's actually out there for a curriculum of this sort. Then we're working with NASA on a number of different projects. We're working on them helping to review some of the COAs to look at the safety cases and see if we can tweak and create some best practices for improving the safety of public aircraft operations in the COA. And we also are working on a project with them on training at their facilities, quarterly training opportunities at NASA Langley to start. And then we're going to have discussions with the other NASA offices around the country to give an opportunity for public safety members to fly at NASA in some inside space where they can fly regardless of the weather. And there's a lot more, but those are the kind of major headings that we're working on right now.
Well, that's a pretty full agenda. I recently attended Airworks in Las Vegas and sat in on a session on drones as a first responder. That particular use case has a lot of value and seems to be catching on in other public safety organizations. How many other agencies are using drones as a first responder?
Yeah, I think right now when we're talking about beyond visual line of sight, I think there's about 16, but we have probably another 100 that are waiting in line. And what we've seen now is these waivers for drones as a first responder, which may have taken a year. In the past, we've been working really diligently with the FAA over the past year. And the city of Campbell, California was actually able to get their drone as a first responder COA within 2 weeks. So we're starting to change the dynamic on that. And we're working now on a template. If you're familiar with the tactical beyond visual line of sight that we helped get that waiver for, we got a template. And now there's 100% of the agencies that have submitted for their tactical waivers have been approved and usually is in within 3 or 4 days. That means they can fly beyond visual line of sight for those dangerous missions. So a SWAT operation, a hostage, a hazmat situation where you really don't want the remote pilot literally in the line of fire. They can fly 1,500 feet horizontally away from it and over a building and around a building beyond visual line of sight without calling anybody, as long as we're meeting the facility grids. And then something that happened recently that we're working with that's part of the drone as first responder, but it's a little bit of a spinoff, is the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police, Stephen Oscar, worked on some space. He was working with the airports. The facility maps are really developed and determined by the airports to say what level of flight can a drone be around an airport. And surprisingly, they were able to create custom grids just for public safety and submit that through their COA, and it was approved by the FAA because the airports all approved. And what we've seen is that most of the airports and the public safety programs have great relationships anyway. And with those relationships, they kind of work through it. And I think Las Vegas was surprisingly given more flying areas than they even expected. So there's a lot of movement there. There's a trust back and forth between the airport and the public safety, but there's a lot of movement in the space. And I think the other part of Drone as a First Responder that we're really watching closely is Pearland, Texas, with Brandon Carr. He's the UAS manager and well known in the industry, is working on the technology. They right now have the Iris Casio G 2 nodes in place to do some of the actual monitoring of what's happening in the airspace, both by using optical cameras and by pulling in the ADS-B feed and combining them both to give you a visual. So it gives you the ability to see a lot more. Visual observers are okay, but I think if we get the technology that can give us more information, it will be better. And if that ends up being approved by the FAA, it'll be the first true beyond visual line of sight. And as you may have heard, it would take the pilots off the roof, which means bad weather, heat, all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't have to have somebody. So that's a big change, which will also impact how many people are then interested in having drones as a first responder. And we do know that the BVLOS operation has been approved in Canada by Transport Canada. So we're hoping we can carry that over into the United States.
DroneResponders has been around for quite a while. I'm curious, what's the current reach of the organization?
I usually see 15 to 20 new members a day. And what's interesting, and I took a snapshot the other day, which is kind of funny, is that it was like California, Maine, Florida, Texas, Japan, Canada, Norway, the UK. It was just been amazing to see. And the sharing of information back and forth has been just a phenomenal experience. We now see that there are over 5,000 public safety agencies with drone programs. Some are COAs, some are Part 107, some are both. It's kind of a balancing act, but it's great to see. I remember I was excited when I had 500 members. And now when I see us heading up towards the 7,000 mark, it's kind of blowing me away.
What's the best way for a public safety organization to go about setting up a drone program?
Yeah, so one of the things that's most important that any agency do is the first thing they do is they meet and do town hall meetings with their citizens before you even go to your elected officials to share and ask, what they think and answer questions. And then when you take that information to the board of supervisors or city council, you have that information input that you've gotten the information. We also encourage everybody to meet with the ACLU to make sure you understand the policies and procedures so that we can write that up. And then we have an outreach program designed that you can customize on our website as well in the resource center. So you can actually change the names and just have a plan that's already written about how to do that, because it really is about the relationships and very clear, transparent information as far as what you're going to do with the drones and what you're not going to do with the drones.
Does DroneResponders have a how-to or best practice resource on the website so that agencies can learn how to successfully start their own drone program?
Yeah, and it's customizable and it's in Word, so you can very quickly edit it to make it your own. And we have just about everything you're looking for on our website. SOPs, declaration letters, copies of COAs. We have a step-by-step process guide that was done. We worked with Brandon Carr from Pearland, Texas, and the FAA to create a step-by-step through the COA application process, or CAPS.
Charles, is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
We are working on, with the FAA and some departments out in California, on some kind of uniquely special waivers that will be allowed during red flag days, which I've seen right now in the center of the country. There's a huge section of red flag days that are up. And those are the days where it's very dangerous fire conditions. To be able to fly some persistent flights, to be looking for the early detection of fires, or to be able to respond quickly to do an extinguishment. And then we're moving into looking at that next level of getting to the heavier UAS that can actually do some logistical things of moving some significant equipment from one place to another or doing some fire suppression activities. The next big thing is advanced air mobility. There are a lot of discussions now about vertiports, about air taxis, air ambulances, and those kind of things. So we're now starting to get engaged in those kind of things of thinking what's next. And we're doing this all kind of in parallel. So we're working on what's here now and what's coming next to be planning and be ready for that.
And for my final question, Charles, What message would you like to leave regarding the future of public safety and drones?
What I would tell people today is that from what we've seen, as far as what drones can provide, drones do three things. They enhance the safety of the responder, the citizen, and the community. They help to provide better operational decisions because you're getting more information on the decisions you're making. And last, it helps you provide real-time situational awareness during a lot of different emergencies. And I would just urge people that if you haven't started the program, either reach out to a neighboring community that has one and have a plan to be able to use it. Or if you have questions, visit DroneResponders website and check our resource center out. It gives you everything you want to know about starting the program. And if you have questions, you can always email me at charles@DroneResponders.org.
That's it for episode 380 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Charles Werner of DroneResponders. I want to thank Charles for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about DroneResponders or want to connect with Charles, check out the webpage at DroneResponders.org. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for a small donation, you can help defray the cost of production. To help, go to DroneRadioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.